Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengauzen. Today is November 6th, and there are a lot of interesting news stories. In this episode, a powerful strike on a Russian military base. More than 1,000 drones were burned almost instantly. I'll show you this video. One of Russia's largest power plants and a huge oil refinery were also attacked. And that's not even the full harvest of Ukrainian missiles and drones from this night. Putin is entering an arms race he's already lost, and Maduro is in the crosshairs. It turns out the US is preparing 3 scenarios for his removal. American media are reporting on this. Medvedev is once again openly insulting Donald Trump. Meanwhile, the Kremlin is puzzled about what the American president is planning. Who will dare the other in the nuclear arms race? All this and more in today's episode. If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's start with direct sanctions from the forces of Ukraine's drone systems. Now I'll show you a video. Honestly, I haven't seen anything like this in a long time. Take a look. This is a storage base for Shahed launch equipment that just blew up. It was located on the territory of Donetsk airport. I kept wondering what could have exploded like that, but now there's clarification. This target was extremely important to hit. So, the base was called Geran. In the evening, a strike was carried out on the launch positions and storage facilities for Geran 2 type drones at the airport base in the city of Donetsk. It has been contained. During the attack, both cruise missiles and strike drones were used, so this was a complex attack, and this strike apparently was a direct hit. Now I'll tell you exactly where. The ammunition depot was completely destroyed, the fuel depot was destroyed, the pre-launch preparation point for the drones was destroyed, and the power supply and communication nodes were damaged. At the time of the strike, there were up to 1,000 of these drones and more than 1,500 warheads on the territory of this airfield, which are attached to these drones so that they can attack Ukrainian territory. So in other words, it was a direct hit. Bingo! This was a joint operation by the Special Operations Forces and the Brigade Reconnaissance of the 114th Separate Brigade of Unmanned Systems, known as Magyar's Birds. Well, what can I say? Magyar's sanctions are visible from dozens of kilometers away. But that's not all. In Volgorechensk, Kostroma region, there was an attack. The Kostroma GRES is one of the most powerful power plants in the Russian Federation. In other words, it's a giant, simply a giant. The station is considered the 3rd most powerful thermal power plant in Russia. It supplies electricity to more than 40 regions of the Russian Federation. This facility sustained damage, explosions, fires, everything you like. So, just so you understand what kind of behemoth this is, 3 independent 500 kilovolt transmission lines run from the GRES in 3 key directions, toward Moscow, Vladimir, and Nizhny Novgorod. Local authorities say that everything is fine, nothing to worry about. Well, you can take a look at this photo. Really, what is there to worry about? No station, no worries. This GRES operates as many as 8 turbines, so this is a really powerful facility. And here's what's interesting. From this Kostroma GRES, lines go to the Vladimir, Zagorsk, and Nizhny Novgorod substations. And just recently, the Vladimir and Nizhny Novgorod substations were attacked. So, it seems that Ukraine has decided in a very systematic way to prove that a blackout will happen faster in the Russian Federation. And the version from the local authorities, do you know what the local governor said? There were a few pops and the fire is being contained. They still, call some explosions pops. So there were a few pops. Honestly, it just seems like someone in front of the screen was applauding Magyar for how precisely everything hit. And that's not all. There's an uproar in the swamps about the massive attack on Volgograd. Once again, the Lukoil oil refinery in Volgograd was hit, oil processing. The local governor confirmed it. And just for a second, 15.7 million tons of processing at the site of the explosion and fire. And that's still not all. In occupied Crimea, 3 fuel facilities have been destroyed in Vladiska Simferopol district. Storage tanks are burning. In fact, entire tank farms and fuel tankers are on fire. They are finishing off the oil depots in occupied Crimea. In Crimea, after the largest oil depot, which was located in Feodosia, burned down, and the terminal there also burned down, the remaining ones in Simferopol and Hvardiske are being finished off. In other words, they have already been attacked several times. The southern grouping of Russian troops may be left, or rather, will have very serious problems with fuel. Well, there's still one more important oil depot left to finish off in Inkerman. I mentioned it before, it's more difficult there. There, the storage tanks are underground, right inside the rock. But that's okay, they'll get to that one too. Inkerman is in Sevastopol, where I was born. Whenever this topic comes up, it's, well, special for me. So for obvious reasons, I can't go there. I'll go when the scum are no longer in Crimea, and I'm sure that's exactly what will happen. But I have good friends, good acquaintances. Recently, we've also gotten to know some Crimean partisans, and soon you'll get a surprise from them. In short, they pass different information on to me. So when the topic of Sevastopol comes up, the city where I was born, where I've probably explored every corner, and I've traveled all over Crimea too, I have a lot to share. As kids, we used to climb around the Inkerman tunnels in Inkerman. The cliffs there are all cut through with caves. Those are the quarries. They've been quarrying that Inkerman stone there since ancient times. It's a very white limestone. And to this day, no one knows how long those tunnels actually are. There's a lot of interesting stuff connected to them. Of course, for that, we could have gotten in trouble there, but we always managed to run away. Of course, we never went in too deep. So, during World War II, Red Army troops were stationed in those tunnels, those galleries carved into the cliffs. I mean, it's not just the Red Army that used those caves to store ammunition. Who knows who else did? There was an underground hospital there as well. People even went down there. Just imagine how extensive that network is in those mountains of tunnels. That, according to various estimates, up to 10,000 residents of Sevastopol went down there and lived in these peculiar cells, or just in small partitioned off spaces. Well, not even rooms really, just about 1.5 meters wide, and that's where they lived. So just imagine, 10,000 civilians, the military, there were workshops down there, there were even factories, well, small factories, not full-scale ones, set up for production. There was a cave monastery there. Overall, it's a very interesting place, and to this day, by the way, it's still not fully explored. Since childhood, this story just came to mind. I remember how they used to tell us in school, in local history lessons, that, well, besides everything else, these adits were also used to store champagne. It was the perfect place with the ideal microclimate, humidity, temperature, and so on. The mountain there is even called Champagne, that's its actual name. They stored the champagne right in those caves. So in our local history lessons, they told us that when the fascists came there, when they were already approaching the area of Inkerman and these ancient cave cities, they blew up this Champagne mountain, the mountain and the city that was inside it, and as a result, several thousand people tragically died there. Basically, the mountain just went like this. It jumped up, the adits collapsed, and people died. But then it turned out that things were a bit different. This is what I mean about how history gets rewritten, including by Putin. It's being shamelessly distorted. Soviet history has been rewritten in the best traditions of that practice. And then it turned out that things were a little different. In other words, it was actually the retreating Red Army troops who blew up the adits. This in no way justifies those Nazi beasts, Nazi Germany, which suddenly decided to go to war. But let's not tell the whole story. Before that, after all, they had come to an agreement with Stalin. It was only later that Hitler decided Stalin wasn't that strong. So how was the story presented? It turns out that as the Red Army troops were retreating from there, they realized that they simply couldn't physically evacuate the severely wounded. Some of the ammunition that was left behind in the mountains also couldn't be taken out. There were civilians there, elderly people, children. Well, what could be done about them either? Moreover, apparently, judging by various accounts I've read, they set off the explosion thinking it would only blow up the part with the ammunition, or, well, in general, no one really expected what happened. In the end, they blew up their own people and took off. So regarding the Soviet rewritten history, practically all of it has been rewritten. All those pioneer heroes are made up. All those Vali Kotikis and others, it's all made up, and Putin is doing the same thing now. By the way, friends, let me remind you, we have some important fundraising going on. Sometimes, forgive me, I drift off into history, but I think maybe that's sometimes necessary to take a break. Important fundraising is happening. Yesterday we watched an absolutely incredible video of our soldier being evacuated by the Mall unmanned evacuation vehicle, which we raised funds for together. We actually raised enough for 2 of those. All in all, it's an amazing story. The evacuation vehicle carried him for 60 kilometers, 30 of which were on a flat tire. The soldier was wounded for 30 days, spent 33 days at the positions, and they couldn't evacuate him. In the end, it all worked out. It's simply a miracle. These are completely different realities of modern warfare. A robot came and saved a life. Many people have been asking what happened to the sergeant who stayed at the position, who didn't abandon him and waited for the evacuation vehicle for over 30 days. According to my information, the sergeant remained at the position, and soon I will have more details about his situation, which I will definitely share with you. But today, our defenders also need your help. We are launching a fundraiser for the soldiers of the 95th Separate Air Assault Brigade. This is for the unit of Ivan, known to some of you by the call sign Pastor. We have already helped him once before, and now they need our help again. It is very much needed. For those hearing this call sign for the first time, let me tell you, Vanya is from Kharkiv, and his call sign Pastor is not just for show. He is an actual pastor of one of the churches. When the occupiers came to the Kharkiv region, he took up arms and went to defend his native Kharkiv region. By the way, greetings to Kharkiv, to the people of Kharkiv and to the Kharkiv region. So Vanya has suffered several concussions. Right now, he's in the hospital again and wrote that once they patch up his legs, he'll be back with his comrades. He's just an Iron Man. That's the kind of pastor he is, you know, a real one. Ukraine stands on people like him. Let's do it. Let's help our warriors and defenders. The details are in the description of this video. There is Mono, there is PryPal for those who want to help from abroad, and there is Privat. I'm asking you very much. Let's help Vanya's brothers in arms. Well, since we've started talking about the adits, let's move on to the bunkers. Now all the bunker-dwelling fiends have woken up, and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Belousov, has proposed to Putin to immediately begin preparations for a test of nuclear weapons on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago. He claims that the US is planning to deploy missiles in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region with a flight time from Germany to central Russia of about 6 to 7 minutes. And he also claims, this is important, that during exercises in October, the US supposedly practiced a nuclear missile strike on Russia. Well, they didn't practice it, since you're still here talking. Well, all right, that's... In October, the US conducted an exercise practicing a preemptive nuclear missile strike, Belousov reported. That's a direct quote. Well, in response, I think Medvedev conducted an exercise practicing a preemptive shot of vodka because after that he started making some rather strange statements. And it's not just that he quieted down about Donald Trump, he completely stopped acting like himself. So basically, suddenly in Russia they remembered that the US, it turns out, also has nuclear weapons. And if you keep waving your rusty sarmat around, you might provoke a very unpleasant response. Earlier, Trump stated that he had ordered the first nuclear tests in 30 years to be conducted. At the same time, by the way, the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, Narishkin, claims that the US avoided giving a substantive response to Russia's inquiry regarding Trump's statements about nuclear tests. And then Putin showed up as well, and that was actually very interesting to watch. It was a meeting. I'm not showing it to you here because, well, I'm afraid you might smash your screens or spit on them if I show you Putin's disgusting face. So basically, Putin popped up out of nowhere like a jack-in-the-box and said that if the US conducts nuclear tests, Russia will take appropriate action. Let's start with the fact that the phrase Russia will take appropriate action is an oxymoron in itself. I mean, a real one. So what actions are you going to take? Are you going to whack the crows with a hazel stick? I can already see the headlines. In response to US nuclear tests, Putin raised the retirement age in Russia to 100 and increased taxes by another 101%. And also banned the White House administration from visiting Syzran. Take that, Donald Trump. You never expected this. You won't be eating at Kroshka Kartoshka restaurants. You'll have to eat at your lousy McDonald's. If the US and other treaty participants conduct nuclear tests, we will take appropriate measures, Putin said. But what kind? What kind exactly? So you decided to play tough with Trump in nuclear tests? And by the way, everyone remembers how the arms race ended for the USSR? And can Russia handle it? Let me remind you, Russia's GDP is less than that of the state of Texas, the whole of Russia. Can Russia handle this race? Or maybe they'll weld it back again, like they used to do before, back when the US was the enemy, and there was no need to try to figure out whether we were friends or not anymore with Donald Trump. Back when the US was simply the enemy, they would weld rusty pipes onto the roofs of their beat-up jalopies, Jigulis, some UAZ vehicles, rusty pipes painted to look like rockets, with "To Washington" written on them. And so they would drive around the courtyards drunk, cackling with their toothless grins, or gold-toothed for those who were better off. So what? Are they going to organize a car rally with those rusty pipes on their roofs? Half the cars on Russian roads would probably lose their wheels in these conditions. So the key difference between the Russian and US tests is quite significant. I have watched several different videos on this topic to compare the results and understand the situation better. Of the test launch of this intercontinental ballistic missile, without a warhead, of course, which the United States published and distributed to the media, basically, here's the silo, here's the missile launching from the silo, here's how it takes off, here's how the stage separates and is jettisoned, here's how it sets its course, how it flies. But please, explain this to me. Why is it that when the US conducts tests, they show everything in full detail, comment on it, and explain everything, but when Putin tests the Burevestnik or Poseidon, first of all, it's always after the fact. If they even tested it, it's just, oh, we already tested it, and then they show some cartoons from Soyuz Multfilm or some clumsy animation slapped together by some amateur designer. Why do you think that is? Maybe it's because there were no real tests at all. Or maybe it's because it wasn't the Burevestnik flying at all. Let me remind you, Putin said that we're going to put all of these on combat duty. This Burevestnik is called Chernobyl, the Flying Chernobyl. It had failed 13 test flights before that. 13. Then Putin said, yes, everything is successful. Poseidon, Burevestnik, all are on combat duty. I've never lied to you. And here comes the first tough response from Putin to Donald Trump. Putin's attack-picking geese, Dmitry Medvedev, was let off the leash, and for now he's being cautious, but he's already started to bark a little. I quote, "No one knows what Trump meant when he talked about nuclear tests. Probably he doesn't know himself," says Medvedev. But he is the President of the United States, and the consequences of such words are inevitable. Russia will be forced to independently assess the advisability of conducting such tests of its own full-scale ones as well. And honestly, I was even surprised. Where are all those old catchphrases? Senile old men. Sorry if this offends anyone, I'm just quoting him. Yankees, Bandera Nazis, grunting piglets. Where are all those words? He's not so bold anymore, it seems. Or maybe he just didn't get around to them before writing about the liquor vodka tests. What happened? Immediately after this, Putin's press secretary Peskov made a statement that Russia's nuclear triad has been modernized. How so? Well, I don't understand. The nuclear triad means land-based silo missiles, those at sea, including submarines, and the air component, which is strategic aviation, the ones that are launched from planes. What exactly did you modernize? How did you modernize the nuclear triad? How? Russia really is a unique country, one that can modernize its nuclear triad without conducting the necessary number of successful tests. In fact, it might not even conduct any tests at all, but somehow it just gets modernized on its own. It's like iOS, some kind of patch gets installed, bing, overnight, and the nuclear triad is updated. It's just some dumb lie, honestly, on the level of kindergarten. We've updated the nuclear triad, and then we updated the nuclear decatriad back then. That's the level we're at. I can just imagine it. Someone reports to Putin that the US has successfully tested a delivery system, an intercontinental ballistic missile. He says, go tell them we've updated our triad. Yeah. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Check and see if you're subscribed or not. Here, we don't just expose Russian propaganda, but we're also conducting a census of the planet's reasonable people. And many subscribers have long noticed that those who subscribe to the Spokojnaya Analitika channel end up with soft and silky hair. So go ahead and subscribe. You'll see there will be plenty of people in the comments who'll say it happened to them. There is another organization in Russia that periodically comes up with some fantastic stories. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. So the statement, fasten your seatbelts, doesn't really apply to Russians. They still can't manage to make a proper gearbox or airbags in their cars, by the way. What amazing technology. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service accuses the West of preparing a sabotage at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. with the meltdown of the active zones of its nuclear reactors in order to blame Russia for it. Moscow claims that in the event of such an accident, there would be victims among both Ukrainian citizens and those of Eastern Europe. So, the threat of the Burevestnik didn't work. Everyone has already forgotten about the Sarmat. Does anyone here even remember the Oreshnik? Now the Russians have decided to threaten with a man-made disaster. Let me remind you, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is currently completely controlled by the Russians. Its reactors are in cold shutdown mode. That's the current state. Creating the conditions for such a man-made disaster with a reactor meltdown is practically impossible without access to the facility. Every statement from Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service can be regarded as a confession, as if to say, we want to do this, but we'll claim it's Ukraine. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service has an official website where they publish these wet fantasies of theirs. I have a feeling that all these different versions are written by the head of the SVR, Narishkin himself. By the way, he's pictured on the main page there. You know, in the past, at photo studios, people used to pose like this for photos, like this. And that's exactly how he's sitting there. Really, you can go and see for yourself. So here's what the SVR's official website has been warning about lately. This is not a joke, it's all from the official website. So the SVR is issuing warnings. A group of Russian traitors, dressed as ordinary Russians, are supposed to attack a ship in a European port, then surrender and claim that they were hired by Moscow. All of this is being organized by the UK, of course, who else, with the help of the Ukro-Saxons. Another piece of news. This is all in chronological order, what they've reported literally over the past month. A group of Russian traitors, probably the same ones, and Belarusians who were hired by Ukrainians are supposed to attack targets on Polish territory. When they're caught, they're supposed to say that they were hired by Moscow. Yeah, that's usually how it works. This was also before the elections in Moldova. I like this one. These are their official statements. NATO troops are preparing to enter Moldova from Ukrainian territory. The landing force has already landed in Odessa. By the way, while we're at it, a big hello to Odessa, where I spent part of my childhood in Moldavanka. So NATO is supposedly landing somewhere in Odessa. There was some sprat, eggplant caviar, we had some borscht for lunch, and then headed off to Moldova. Why in Odessa? For what? If that's not enough for you, here's another statement. British intelligence agencies are preparing an environmental disaster in international waters. Attack on a Shadow Fleet tanker. They'll pollute the waters and the European coastline and blame Russia for it. Well, by the way, Putin does a pretty good job of that himself, even without the British. Just remember his 2 River Sea tankers that wrecked and polluted the Black Sea and my native Crimea. They still can't clean up the fuel oil. So Putin is, excuse my French, a crap wizard. Whatever he touches, it all turns into some kind of sludge, filth, rot, murk, I don't know, just some kind of muck. Although, muck is actually okay, by the way. This is all just to understand what kind of lunatics, KGB agents, pensioners, these senile people the world, and especially Ukraine, has to deal with. There he is on Rishka, sitting in that pose of his. So, who should we attack on behalf of Great Britain today? And he writes this every evening. They're absolutely out of their minds. It seems that Venezuelan dictator Maduro is going through a really rough patch right now, seriously. Trump was offered 3 options for a military operation against Venezuela. Donald Trump's administration developed several plans up to and including the elimination of Maduro. This was reported by the New York Times. Well, yes, the president is not rushing. The US president is not in a hurry to make a decision. He wouldn't want to put American soldiers at risk. But he does like some of the ideas. Let me remind you, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, among all the countries in the world. So according to the New York Times, the first option is as follows. It involves carrying out airstrikes on military targets, some of which may be used to supply banned substances to the US, something Trump has repeatedly accused Maduro of. And the justification for the intervention would be that Maduro and his top officials are central figures in the Cartel de los Soles, which Washington has recognized as a narco-terrorist organization. I read about this cartel. The name is connected to the image of suns, cartel of the suns, that's how it's translated. Why? It's called the cartel of the suns because the highest-ranking Venezuelan military officers have golden suns, not stars, on their epaulets. So it turns out that the top military ranks and the country's political leadership are covering up all of this. Well, what else would they be doing? What? There is a whole series of investigations. At the end of March 2020, the US Department of Justice accused Maduro and 14 current and former officials of being involved in all of this, and also of corruption and committing other criminal offenses. And in general, Maduro has been one of the leaders of the Cartel of the Suns since at least 1999. They set up a route from Colombia to the US through Venezuela. So the first option is to strike military targets. The goal of the operation is to deprive Maduro of military support. And then he might try to flee. Well, we'll see. Another option is to send in special forces to try to capture or eliminate Maduro. But that's a pretty complicated operation. I think it's something like, well, who knows, the raid on Amin's palace may be possible, but not easy. But why send in special forces? Well, probably because they want him to testify about something. To stand trial. And the third option is much more complicated, sending in counter-terrorism forces to seize control of airfields, some oil fields, in other words, to take control of the infrastructure. And then, as I understand it, internal resistance would begin, and the potential for that is very high in Venezuela, because how can you live in a country that literally sits on oil, yet 99% of its citizens are in poverty, plus there's Maduro with his militants there. In general, Venezuela is a classic example of the resource curse. I've talked about it before. When a country discovers large oil reserves on its territory, people who look a bit further ahead realize that maybe this isn't such a good thing, maybe it's actually quite bad. Let me explain why. What happens? So the country discovers huge oil reserves. Wow, the money starts flowing in. And then the country gets hooked on this oil needle, sells oil, and basically starts living off oil sales. Why should we bother developing technology? Come on, what science are you talking about? Forget about everything else. Only oil. We're a gas station country. Just like the well-known Russian Federation. The government immediately becomes detached from the people because it no longer depends on taxes. Your taxes are just pennies. We'll just sell some more oil now. A couple million barrels and everything will be fine. Or maybe even billions in total. And a certain rentier elite forms, which takes control of all these oil flows. Naturally, they are close to the country's leadership. Naturally, they are protected by the military and security forces and so on. So this elite merges together and then everything falls into place for them. Corruption, authoritarianism, and anyone who starts making noise. Independent media, some journalists. Be quiet, stay out of our schemes. We'll deal with you, just shut them down. And what about sanctions on our New York? Yeah, to hell with all of you. That's how it happens. This is where there are short-sighted rulers, like the Russian Federation, like Maduro, for example. But there are also those who succeeded. Canada, Norway, for example. But there are those who succeeded. By the way, when I was reading about this Sun cartel and how Maduro turned things around and organized all of it, I thought that Lukashenko with his cigarette smuggling, sending them over to Lithuania on balloons, is just child's play in comparison. Obviously, things are much more serious with him. He even smuggles them in train cars. But recently I came across a video of Lukashenko where he just completely exposes himself. Let me remind you of the recent backstory. From the territory of Belarus, dozens of balloons with packages of contraband cigarettes attached to them have started flying into Lithuania in large numbers. Well, they're not even regular balloons, not the kind you have at a party. These are weather balloons, really big ones. And a few of these balloons ended up being affected when, apparently, the wind changed direction. I don't think the smugglers intended for them to end up at Vilnius airport. So the wind changed, they flew there, Vilnius airport was shut down, and Lukashenko was told he'd gone too far. Lithuania is closing its border with Belarus until the end of November. And now comes the most interesting part. First of all, Lukashenko accused the Lithuanians of smuggling. Well, what else is he supposed to do? He lies as easily as he breathes, after all. He said that the Lithuanians themselves came here, bought contraband cigarettes, and then sent them home in balloons. And what about them? What are they doing there? Is this supposed to be around the world in 80 days or something? What is this even supposed to be? And Lukashenko said one more important thing. We talked to our people, the smugglers. They said, was it you? They replied, no, not us. You sent so much. No, not us. So basically we talked to them, and it turns out it wasn't them. And well, that's that. And do you know why with our people? Because the Lukashenko clan has long been covering all the smuggling in Belarus. Well, I think no one ever doubted that. To understand whether you can trust Lukashenko or not, let me remind you that Lukashenko claimed Ukraine was planning to attack Belarus just to somehow justify Putin. So he says, I'll show you this map now, where Ukraine was supposedly planning to attack, and that Russian troops, Lukashenko also said this, got lost while going from Belarus back to Russia, got lost and ended up somewhere near Kiev. It wasn't on purpose, they just wanted to take a shortcut with their tanks. I mean, just imagine he's spouting this kind of nonsense. He probably wants to be declared insane. You know, like in movies when a maniac doesn't want to be executed. He just pretends to be crazy. No, Lukashenko, that's not going to work. And by the way, he also claimed that he drove a tractor at 290 kilometers per hour. That's not a joke, he actually said that. Well, as Putin said, sanctions only make Russia and Belarus stronger. And here is proof of that strength. Russia has started buying apples from the Taliban. Representatives of the Taliban movement have decided to deliver the first batch of 50 tons of local apples, according to the Kabul Tribune. Well, in February, Russia's ambassador to Afghanistan, Dmitry Zhirnov, reported that the Taliban are supplying a wide range of goods, including spices, energy drinks, and medicinal herbs. Lavender, thyme, and of course cauldrons for pilaf, he noted. The ambassador. Take that, Europe. You see, now Russia has pilaf cauldrons from the Taliban, and you don't. And now Russian diplomats have already been restricted in their movements within the Schengen zone. Wonderful. Plus, Peskov popped up and for the 10th time stated that there was no reaction from the US to the statement about Poseidon and Burevestnik. They all keep saying it. There was no reaction? None at all? How can that be? Why aren't you afraid over there in the US? I think what I'm about to say is probably something Russians really wouldn't want to hear. Not the mustachioed floozy Peskov, nor his senile boss, that old man Kabayev. A test of a launch vehicle, nuclear weapons by the US, and the announcement of nuclear tests. That's Trump's reaction to your these old man antics of yours and your clowning around your Soyuz Multfilm cartoons. This is the reaction. He won't be like, oh, I'm concerned. He'll just test it. He'll just show that he has it while you keep making cartoons. Trump, well, look, the rocket is flying. It's been flying for 1,000,000 years. But why aren't you afraid? And about the arms race that Putin got involved in, I read some very interesting information today. It turns out that just recently, NATO has actually surpassed the Russian Federation in ammunition production. This was reported by the Secretary General of the Alliance, Mark Rutte. He stated that until recently, Russia was ahead of everyone, but now a bunch of new production facilities have started up, and overall, the situation has changed. Of course, it would be nice if the whole world spent its resources not on shells, rockets, and mines. Additional defense budgets, but on space research, I don't know, science, or fighting diseases. But for that to happen, people like Putin simply need to be destroyed at the very beginning, when they start a war, so that all other authoritarian rulers and dictators would have nightmares about what happens when they go to war against someone. And from somewhere above, immediately, literally the next day, he is simply eliminated. You know, some sort of world committee like all those leagues of justice in the movies. Of course, that's a utopia. I don't know, let it be something else then. The Golden Committee, that way Donald Trump would really like it. The Golden Committee, a new all-powerful organization that would regulate these issues. So Putin decides to rule for life. He chooses the path of dictatorial rule. He gets a call. Hello. We heard you decided to rewrite the Constitution. You shouldn't act like that. And you shouldn't reset your terms either. We strongly advise you not to do this. Otherwise, well, you'll just die, that's all. What can you do? And we'll also tell everyone that you wear 7-centimeter heels. Yeah, well, that was another digression. Politics has never been synonymous with decency or justice. Quite the opposite, in fact. Politicians weren't, but we can be. So, friends, Take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, subscribe to this channel, and let's help our steel warriors and support the unit of our Ivan Pasta. Let me remind you the details are in the description of this video. Take care of yourselves, and glory to Ukraine.